Okay, in terms of the stuff, as always, just bad news. But this is the last of the bad news, so there we go.
Wow.
Hey, I guess the end of bad news is good news. Exam 3, Exam 4, quizzes, Part 4. Deadline by tomorrow, April 24th, at end of day, 11:59 p.m. Exam number 5, the final deadline is Thursday of finals week at noon. You can do it ahead of time. All this stuff is online and accessible. Just be sure to complete it before the deadline. For the paper, there's still tomorrow, at end of day, the half-credit deadline. And in terms of the grade breakdown, the quizzes, the best 10 regardless of type count, and there's about 20 plus of those. They're 30% of the grade. For the exams, it's the best 4 out of 5. They're 40% of the grade. For the paper, it's the best paper out of paper, 30% of the grade. Now, to see like how you're doing, for real in the class, the thing to do is fire the web browser, go to the Blackboard, go to look at your overall grade, and that shows you your real-time worst-case scenario. And that involves basically 3 factors. One is the stuff you've done. Secondly, anything you haven't done, it treats as a hypothetical 0. So if you haven't done, say, exam 3 and 4 yet, and you're wondering, why is my grade so horrible? If you did well in the exams, it's because if you haven't done exam 3 and 4 or 5 yet, it's loading those in as zeros. When you win and if you do them, it swaps out the 0 for the real score. So the overall grade then is your worst case because it's putting zeros in for anything you haven't done, including of course the final. And then thirdly, the Blackboard is set so again it's either keeping the best scores or dropping the worst, whichever way you like looking at it, and it's doing that automatically. Now again, until you've got stuff, until you've got at least 10 quizzes, 4 exams in the paper, there'll be zeros in there that will be kept. So if you've done, say, 2 exams, that means 2 of your exam scores would be those hypothetical zeros. But then when you do stuff again, it will replace the hypothetical 0 with the real grade. Now for the final, again, to decide whether you need the final, because I assume no one wants it, the thing to do is once you've done like the 4 exams, any quizzes you want to do, then gaze at your overall grade, through a web browser, and if you find that grade to be like satisfactory, then you just avoid the final. You get the 0 would remain on it, but again, the overall grade already assumes a 0 on the final, and you can't do any worse than a 0. If you do take the final, it can't hurt your grade because again, it's already scored as a hypothetical 0. It may, if it's better than your other exams, it will be kept. If it's not, it'll be dropped. So in terms of like your grade, it's no risk. You can't get any worse by taking the final. But basically, it's a judgment of how much time do you want to spend on the final, how much time do you want to spend on studying for it, and how much other stuff do you have to do. Last thing, before we get back to Kant, the Corps called me yesterday and said, hey, we want to see you Monday, which is it's weird. Usually you call in like Friday and they tell you. I guess they're. I guess in a way it's kind of good because at least I know, a couple of days ahead of time how my Monday is going to be. And so I'll be in court on Monday. Now in terms of how it affects like the class, thanks to because everything's up on Blackboard, that will still go just automatically. Now if you email me, well basically means if you email me, we're not allowed to bring electronics to the court. So if you don't hear from me like all day, that's why. Obviously, no phones either because they're electronic, so none of that. Also, I won't be on campus because I'll be at the courtroom. So if you're looking for me next week, the only way you'll be able to contact me, unless jury duty ends pretty quickly, would be like after I get back. But don't worry, it won't affect your grades because again, Blackboard does all the scoring itself, and I can turn the grades in electronically after court, unless they sequester me someplace. Hopefully not.
And you said the overall grade is our grades?
Yep, but be sure to check on a web browser because if you use the Blackboard app, that does weird stuff.
Yeah.
For no, I'm not sure why, because I set it up, I don't do
So it'd
anything.
be different from the app?
Yeah, the app will do something.
Because it's saying I've got an A in the app.
This
and
is
I did
thousands.
take 2 tests.
Yeah.
This is the thousands.
Yeah, the app will I've seen people that say things like they've gotten, like 6,000 out of 40, like what is that? Why is it?
I'm straight.
Yeah, yeah, it's good. I got 6,000 points. And not only did I pass this class, but I passed like
Screenshot.
100 other
Email
courses.
that to you.
All of philosophy.
Yeah, all the I have one philosophy. Yeah, I don't know why it does that, because I just do the normal Blackboard stuff. I mean, if it's all, I'm not like bringing in like weird script or anything, but it just never works.
So my question is, like when we take our, or when the exams close on Friday, and we have a question about a grade, we want to know that our grade is like really real for real, and you'll be in court on Monday. When's the earliest we could expect to hear back from you if we email you on Monday while you're in court?
It would be, let's see, well, it depends. If I'm in court, the court supposedly closes at 5, but I've heard a friend of mine was on jury duty, they kept him there at one time, I think like 7 or 8.
Okay.
And so it'd be probably, on Monday would probably be like sometime after 5, possibly later.
Okay.
But I check my email over the weekend, so if, you know.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
so if you send me an email on, you know, Friday, I'll be able to respond. You know, I'll check my email on Friday until about, I got meetings during the day, but I'll check it until about 5 or so, 5 or 6. And then I'll check it again Saturday and Sunday.
Cool, all right.
Yes, no problem on Saturday, Sunday.
Cool, cool.
It's a total grade points, right?
Oh, it's the overall grade. Yeah, the total points doesn't mean, in terms of the grade, doesn't mean anything. You want to look at a column for your overall grade. Okay, before I count any more questions about the grady stuff. Okay, so last time we were looking at our good dead friend Immanuel Kant and talking about his metaphysics. And he claims that there are 3 things that we, you know, just can't help, you know, asking about, even though we should know better. And they are the self, cosmos, and God. Now, in regards to the self, he notes that he basically talking with people like Descartes, is that people often think they have a self or a soul, an enduring, you know, death-surviving, non-physical substance. And again, we saw the usual reason for this is, you know, the standard argument. With physical objects, we don't find the properties just kind of float around on their own, like I can't pull away the, you know, the color or the shape. And we think that feelings, thoughts, and beliefs are in the, you know, in the mind or soul, whatever you want to call it. To use a crap analogy to a computer, we don't find programs just kind of like drifting out in the wild. They're always like contained within, you know, some sort of device. And we use this self to synthesize, you know, our experiences, to say it is our experiences. Now, we saw when we looked at our good dead friend Dave Hume, or DH as he was never called, that when we look inside the self using the mind's eye, we never actually get an impression of the self. We just have perceptions of whatever is going on. You know, feeling of an itchy sensation in your foot, feeling of hunger, thinking about, you know what's coming up, graduation or whatever, and you never find this self. Now, Kant agrees with you. We never see the self. We have experiences, but we never experience the self having experiences. So what Kant does is this. He basically says there's the empirical self, which is, you know, he regards, you know, going back to a good dead friend Descartes, he regards Descartes to be an error. Descartes, as you recall from his meditations, thought he could know the self as a substance, that he was a thinky thing that was a substance. And Kant says Descartes was wrong. Why? Well, substance for him is a concept or category used for unifying elements of experience. So it can't be applied to what is behind experience, or so he claims. Now, what Descartes discovered, according to Kant, was not the true metaphysical self, but what he calls the empirical self, which you can know through introspection. So what is then the transcendental self? Well, it's this. It is the the real metaphysical self. But again, for Kant, as you recall, he had that phenomena-noumena distinction. And when you try to apply reason beyond the limits of experience, we end up in this sort of mistaken zone. But the transcendental self is supposed to be this. We have to think of our experiences as if they're related to a unified principle. Something connects them all together. The source of the principle is not something in space or time, and we can't categorize it by the categories that understand it. And this self is the subject underlying all experience. But, he claims, you can't know it through introspection or through science, no matter how sciencey the science is. So, the self then becomes something seemingly essential, because it just doesn't make sense without it, but it is a part of the unknowable noumena. So it ends up in kind of this weird sort of thing. It's like, yeah, we really got to have one of these, but there's no way to know you got one, but you kind of got to have one type of scenario. So what is then the empirical self, if we can't experience the real self? I guess in a way you can never know the real person or the real you. So what are we dealing with like in psychology? Well, for Kant, we're not dealing with the true transcendent self. What we're dealing with is basically this. Firstly, introspection reveals our psychological states. Feeling sad, or feeling happy, knowing why, or depressed, or whatever we're feeling. And so the self of science is not that transcendental self, it's the empirical self. So, psychologists can study the empirical self and determine what could be called law-like regularities in behavior. So science is studying the phenomena and not the noumena. So, we end up with kind of a dual, well, the thing in a way Kant kind of hoped to avoid, we end up with like a dual, I don't want to say reality, but a dual sort of scenario. With the empirical self studied by the psychologist, subject to all the laws of science, and then we have this supposed transcendental self that lies beyond that. So what this tries to do is to again address a problem we saw back at the beginning of Kant, namely how do we reconcile the science with freedom, religion, etc. And in a way it kind of does a bit like Descartes does. Descartes got the physical, duals, the physical world, mental world, and Kant instead has the empirical self, itself studied by psychology, and the transcendental self that we can't actually seemingly know. So that's how he handles the self. It's not part of the phenomena, but we really kind of need it, and so we say, okay, we got one of those. But then science is something to work with, namely the empirical self. Now what about the cosmos? And I don't mean the classic TV show with Carl Sagan, with billions and billions of stars, or the reboot featuring Neil deGrasse Tyson, also with billions and billions of stars. Now the cosmos, of course, is what? It's everything. Yeah, it's everything. It's where we keep our stuff, where we hang out. Now, even though there's, of course, a branch of science, called cosmology, literally the study of the cosmos, and it's kind of a big thing today, Kant claims it's a mistake to think we can reason about the entire cosmos. Why? Well, one problem that he presents in a way is, seemingly reasonable, in a way kind of an obvious one. Can we experience the entire cosmos? No, it's really big. And we have very limited, capacity for experience. We experience just, fragments of it, just what's around us. Now, Locke seemed to have like a workaround for this. Locke said, we can take our finite experiences and use the crap analogy of Photoshop. You can kind of like copy paste, and essentially create a complex idea of the whole by combining all the, basically all the parts, all our finite experiences. Now, Descartes, interesting enough or boring enough, claimed that the infinite is something you can't do that, you can't compound it. And so he had argued that I get an idea of something infinite, I can't make that stuff up, it's gotta be an infinite thing, this is God, God exists. Locke said, no, you can just compound stuff. You can end up with like an infinite composition, by compounding and compounding, and so he thinks that argument doesn't work. But Kant agrees, well, in some ways with Descartes here. Namely, you just can't keep compounding this stuff. But he also disagrees with Descartes in the idea that we can't have an idea of this infinity stuff, at least in regards to the cosmos. How so? Well, the reason basically is this. In order to reason about the entire cosmos, what would we have to be able to see? Or, experience?
No cosmos?
Yeah, the entire cosmos. We have to have like a God's eye view. Do we get that?
No.
No. So his view is, put in a nutshell, we cannot reason about the entire cosmos because of our limited capacity for perception. We just can't see the whole thing. So reason, he thinks, leads to this problem. We try to extend our reason beyond its proper limits. We just can't help it. It's kind of like, again, like with potato chips or or Cheetos. You know you shouldn't do it, but you just can't help it. Or like donuts. So what he ends up doing is presenting what he calls I'll horribly mispronounce it. I want to say anti-monies, like the anti-money. No, it's money and anti-money, it's meaning. That's what brought down the economy. They touched together, the economy went to pieces. I think the correct pronunciation is antimones. There are certain words I just cannot pronounce worth a word, and that is one of them.
Yeah.
But this word. I also want to say synonym, but I also know that's not right. Now, first one is this. Now, he claims that both of these things are plausible claims, but of course, they're contraries. They both could be wrong, but they both can't be true. So, first pair is this. The world has a beginning in time and occupies finite space. So the world has a beginning and a, limited, volume. Secondly, the world has no temporal beginning and is spatially and temporally infinite. World without end. Now, of course, these can be broken down different ways. You might have a world that's beginning, but is infinite. Or you might have a world that has no beginning, but is, small. But Kant basically just presents these two as the opposing pairs. The second one is, firstly, all things can be analyzed into basic components. In other words, you can break everything down. The second one is nothing can be analyzed into basic components. You can't break this stuff down. And thirdly, the free will thing. Some events are free and not determined, and the opposing thing is no events are free, and all events are determined. And lastly, a necessary being exists, and the opposing is there is no necessary being. Now, what Kant does here is he does a method that was used by the ancient skeptics. There was a approach called the two-face approach. Not like the Batman villain. It's not like having a messed up face and flipping a coin to decide whether you're going to shoot people or not shoot people. Although that would make philosophy, I guess, more terrifying than that. But the two-face method is basically what a person would do is they would argue, present really good arguments for a position, and then turn around and give really good arguments, equally good arguments against it. And the skeptics, the reason why they did that, because they wanted to show that any position there is, there are equally good arguments for and against it. So they concluded that it seems as if we don't know anything, because reason can't. You can argue for anything in reason, so it can't help us. Now Kant does kind of a similar thing here. He argues for each claim, presents good arguments for each claim, showing that if you can argue, really well for this, really well for its opposite, that ends up essentially to inconsistency. Namely, that reason seemingly can take us to two very contrary places. Now, he claims the first of each of these pairs is a empiricist position. Oh, sorry. The first is rationalist position, second, empiricist. So the rationalists claim this, empiricists this, rationalists this, empiricists this. Not always, of course, because there are some empiricists who believe God, but essentially, it does seem to be this is more of the rationalist position, and this is more of the empirical position, or so he claims. Now, he is sympathetic to the rationalist, that if we get rid of God and free will, then we end up with morality going out the window. And his solution, interestingly, boring enough to this, is he claims both the rationalist and the empiricist are making mistakes, that they're accepting what he regards as unprovable dogma, that these metaphysical claims are not proven, and the rationalists and empiricists both presuppose that we know what we cannot know. So the rationalists, their mistake is they're trying to talk about the noumena, the really real for real. But Kant has argued you can't. It's beyond the boundaries of experience and reason. The empiricists want to limit everything to the the appearances, the phenomena, but he claims that they mistakenly, as Hume did, assume that the noumena and the phenomena are one. So, what's his fix? Well, basically he does this. In regards to the first two, the one about the cosmos, being in time, etc., and the thing about breaking everything down, not being able to break everything down, he says those are both false because they rest on the assumption that we can reason about the world as a whole. But he claims we can't. We can't know the cosmos. So I guess the TV show on the cosmos was a trick, deception. Now, in regards to the last two, he claims those can be resolved by taking the rationalist position to be true of the noumena, and the empiricist position being true of the phenomena. So, how then do we talk about the noumena? Well, his claim is basically this. While the noumena cannot be part of our theoretical knowledge, they could be supported by what he calls intellectual presuppositions, assumptions, also by faith. Now, again, one of his goals is to reconcile, the whole religion thing, ethics, freedom, with the scientific-y stuff. So he's trying to, have both. And so his solution essentially is just saying, again, if we look at the world, well, not the entire world, we look at stuff one way, in terms of the phenomena, that's the stuff handled by science. That is deterministic. So take like the free will case. He would say this is how we can resolve it. He says, this would be true of the phenomena. This is the world of science, which tells us there's no free will. But this is the world of the noumena, in which there is freedom. This, of course, is something we, is revealed by experience, and this is something that goes beyond reason. So then, what reason do we have to accept this? Well, his claim is that there's more to us than being strictly determined phenomenal beings. That morality requires that we believe this. So, as we'll see, his argument is essentially, we get to believe this because we want to be more than, more than things. So, that takes care of the self, takes care of the cosmos. can't reason about the whole thing, so we're out of luck. So much for that. That's why the TV show was canceled. They realized can't talk about everything. I think it was canceled. They made like one season, never saw it again. Or maybe it's all they planned. So what about God? Well, here he kind of follows Hume, but kind of doesn't. How so? Well, he claims reason cannot prove God's existence. But for those who, don't want to get rid of God, he also claims, much like Hume did, that reason can't disprove God. Now, what he does essentially is an argument by elimination. And there's a couple ways to do arguments by elimination. One way is, the Sherlock Holmes method, where basically, suppose let's say hypothetically you've got 4 alternatives, like 4 suspects. And now if you know that the suspect has to be one of the 4, one way to find out who it is to eliminate the other 3. And the idea is if you eliminate all the things that can't be correct, what remains has got to be the correct one. Now, a second method of argument by elimination, which is actually more of an argument by extermination, would be to say that there are, say, 3 options. These are the only 3. None of them work, so nothing will work. There's no possible way of being correct. And what Kant does here essentially is the argument by extermination. He claims there are 3 and only 3 ways to argue for God's existence. He claims that none of those work. So he infers that since there's only 3 ways to argue for God, and none of the 3 work, there's no way to prove God exists. Now, of course, that rests on the critical assumption that there are only 3 arguments. Because if there's more, then even if we accept that he's shown the 3 don't work, and there's like a 4th or 5th one, those still potentially remain. So what are the 3 arguments? Well, they are the ontological, the cosmological, and the teleological. So the logical arguments. Now, the ontological argument, we saw this before in Descartes. Now, crudely put, it's putting it very, very roughly, it's the argument essentially that goes, like this: God is perfect. So therefore he has to exist. And the reason why is because if he didn't exist, he wouldn't be perfect. But he is perfect, so he has to exist, because otherwise he would be imperfect, but he isn't, so he does. Now, of course, St. Augustine's argument is a bit more complicated, but that's the gist of it. God is perfect, existence is a quality. Since God is perfect, he's got to exist. And if he didn't exist, he wouldn't be God, but he is God, so he's God. Now, Kant gives 2 responses to the argument. Response 1. He does agree that the concept of God contains, whatever that means, the concept of an absolutely necessary being. So kind of crudely put, to use a crappy analogy, if God was a cereal, you had like God flakes or, whatever God would be, whatever God cereal would be. On the list of ingredients, it would have, absolutely necessary. No GMOs, presumably. Gluten-free. Now, he does agree with that. But then he compares it to the nature of a triangle. If you take a triangle, by necessity triangles they have 3 angles. So we know that triangles, got 3 angles, just like we know God is absolutely necessary. But Kant says, does knowing that triangles have 3 angles tell you whether there's a triangle right behind you, right now? No. If there is one, it's got 3 angles, but you don't know if there's one there or not. It could be behind you. Now, he says the same thing in regard to God. If God does exist, then there is an absolutely necessary being. But he says, you can consistently deny that God doesn't exist. You could say, I agree that God is an absolutely necessary being, but there is no such being. to use like another illustration, imagine like a billion-sided figure. We know a billion-sided figure has got a billion sides. But could you deny that there's such a thing? Could you say, yeah, I know what that means, but I don't think there is such a thing? Yeah, it probably, it's easy enough to imagine that there is no billion-sided figure, that no one made one of those things.
Yeah.
Could be. If there is one, it's got a billion sides, because it's a billion, or whatever you call it. But you don't know if it exists. And he says, if God does exist, he's got that, but we don't know if God exists or not, or so it goes. Yeah, so his argument is you can't go from a mere concept, the definition of a thing, to existence. Now the people who buy that argument, such as our good dead friend St. Anselm, who kind of cranked up the original one, and of course our good dead friend Descartes would say that it does work. And so just because Kant said it and he's really smart and really dead, doesn't mean he's right, because the ontological argument does have its staunch defenders. Now a second argument, which does seem pretty good, is this. The ontological argument, rests on existence being a property of things, a quality. Like, again, going back to my crappy cereal analogy, maybe if you had if God was a box of cereal, then on the list of ingredients there'd be existence. Kant's reply is that existence is not a predicate, it's not a property, it's not a quality. I mean, we talk as if it is, we say like that exists, as if it's subject, predicate, but he claims it's not actually a quality of things. And to illustrate this, one way to do it is think of, what he claims is existence is not a property that adds to our conception of a thing. In other words, if we were conceiving of something, we wouldn't stick in existence in there. And the example that's commonly used is, think of a coin. Now think of an existing coin. Is there a difference in your concept? No. Now the usual crappy example that I always use is this. Suppose someone asks me, what kind of car do I drive? And I say, well, I've got a Lamborghini. They say, what's it like? And I say, well, it's really nice. It's got Corinthian leather seats. It's got a Dolby 20 surround sound, because no one else has it, but I got that. And it's got the latest navigation. It's got the latest navigation system. It's got an Apple Watch holder. Well, 3 Apple Watch holders. And of course, cup holders as well. And I go on and on about how great the car is. And so, oh, I got to see this car. And I say, well, unfortunately, by the time I bought all that other stuff, I didn't have enough money for the final part of the deal, which is existence. But it's got all of this stuff. It's red. It's got cup holders. It's got iWatch holders. It's got a great stereo system, but it doesn't have existence. I didn't get that. I couldn't afford that option. That's about all the other stuff. Well, we'd say, well, existence is not a quality. It's not something that something has. And also think about it intuitively. In order for something to have a property, it's already got to exist. So existence can't be a property of thing as God. So Kant's refutation seems to be a pretty good one, namely that the ontological argument requires that existence be a property of things, but it doesn't seem to be like a property something's got. Some things exist, but it's not a quality that something is. It's not like on the list of ingredients. Now again, Kant could be wrong. I mean, he's a really smart guy, he's really dead, but he could have been wrong about that. I think I'm right. I agree with him. I think he's right about that, but I'm less smart than Kant, although still alive. So I guess it's better to be smart or dead, or less smart and alive. Probably less smart and alive, as a rule. Although eventually I'll be dead too. So I guess Kant wins then. Darn you, Kant. So he thinks the ontological argument fails. Of course, there's two left, two contenders, the cosmological and the teleological. Now, the cosmological arguments basically go like this. There's, various variations, but the idea is, okay, you got the cosmos. It had to be caused. You can't get something from nothing. It had to be caused by something. This cause is, got to be a special kind of cause. This is God. Or crudely put, we got a universe, so we got God. Roughly put. Now, why does he think this argument fails? Well, two reasons. One goes back to the cosmos thing. He thinks that our reason cannot extend to the entire cosmos. So if we try to like reason about the entire cosmos, we're doing what we can't do. And essentially ending up to kind of like deluding ourselves. Secondly, the way the cosmological arguments typically go is the idea is, you have the cosmos, you have to have a being that, brought them about. This being has to be necessary. And Kant also thinks that is attacking the ontological argument takes care of that as well. So, but the main thing killing the cosmological argument is Kant says to do it, you've got to be able to reason about the entire cosmos. We can't do that, so the argument fails. So that leaves us with one possibility left, the teleological argument. Now, telos comes from the Greek meaning, end or goal or purpose, and this is also known kind of more popularly as the argument from design. And there are, all kinds of different, incarnations of this argument. But the gist basically is you look at the universe around you, things seem to be designed. One example is the famous, watchmaker argument. If you're on a beach and you find a watch, you would think, oh, someone must have made this. You wouldn't think, wow, the action of the waves, put all this stuff together and built a watch. And so we look at the design of the universe and we infer there must be a design. Now, Kant really, really likes this argument. He says, it's really appealing, and he says that the more science finds out, the more and more that it seems to, support that idea that the universe is designed. So, why doesn't he think that it works, given how much he likes it? Well, here's the problem. He thinks that at best, the teleological argument can show that there is an order or design to, the stuff that exists. So we could say, according to Kant, that there is a design for what is. But the problem is, he claims, we can't go beyond something is ordering the stuff that exists to there is a creator of everything. Why? Well, that would require we get to the cosmological argument. So he thinks the teleological argument at best can show something is organizing what is, but we can never establish through argumentation that a being created everything. So he really likes this, but says that, ultimately it fails, and fails. There's only 3 arguments to prove God's existence, he claims. All 3 fail, so there's no way to prove God exists. Or so he claims. Now, the result isn't quite as bad as one might think. Or, for those who want to be atheists, not quite as good as one might think. Because even though he says, here are the 3 arguments, they all fail, no way to prove God's existence, he takes the other side of the coin, that in trying to disprove God, that also fails too. So his result is essentially that you can neither prove nor disprove God's existence. So ultimately his goal is this. Much like Hume's mystery quote, he says his goal was to deny knowledge in order to make room for faith. So even though we can't prove God, we can't disprove God, so it leaves open 2 possibilities. One, we might have a moral reason to accept God, because we need him for ethics, and we really, really want ethics. Or, as he said, based on faith. So even though you can't prove it or disprove it, there's still room for faith. Or so he claims. Now, before pressing on to some pure reason, and finishing up this part and go into his ethics, anything about this? Is any more stuff? Does anybody have a 4th argument for God? Show Kant's wrong.
I was gonna say Jesus, but that would be like, that would kind of be just after him. It wouldn't work.
It's like Kant still wins. Darn you, Kant. There are some people who have tried other arguments. But yeah, it does seem that he at least covered the three biggies. But kind of the challenge would be, if you want to reply to Kant, would be either showing his refutations of the three arguments, either one or more of them fail, or come up with a fourth one. And philosophers, of course, have been trying to do both. And since Kant's dead, you can't come up with any new responses. Which we
God
can.
killed you, so God is real.
Could be. That one thing.
God killed him.
Yeah, that's true. It's like Nietzsche, God is dead. Nietzsche is dead. God wins. So finishing up the pure reason in the metaphysics. Now, Hume said, famously that if you have books on metaphysics, you should consign them to the flames. And he does agree that metaphysics is a transcendental illusion. But it's irresistible. We can't help ourselves. That even though it goes beyond our reason, these things are just unavoidable in a way. We still wonder about it. So how does he try to present a legitimate use for these concepts? Or, as his critics might say, how does he sneak in this illegitimate stuff? Well, he claims this. These ideas of self, cosmos, and God are useful for, regulating thought, providing a frame of reference, and even though we can't acknowledge these things, it's useful to act as if we do. They are, he claims, the goals of reason. So, for example, psychology acts as if there is a self. Cosmology, people who do cosmology, they act as if they can do what Kant says they can't do, namely talk about the whole cosmos. Now, even though all we can know about the world, according to Kant, is finite bits of experience, it's useful to regard the world as a whole, to do cosmology. It's basically kind of a stand-in. We would say, well, if science could answer all the questions about life, the universe, and everything, that would give us the cosmos. And he thinks the goal is impossible, but he thinks that we're, able to make progress towards this impossible goal, that we can keep expanding. What about with God? Well, the idea of God is useful because it enables us to think about the world as if it had a unity and was created by an intelligent being. And this motivates us, he claims, to create a coherent view of the world. So what does this mean? Well, there seem to be two main interpretations. One interpretation is that Kant is saying that there really are, the self, the cosmos, and God, even though we don't have the capacity to, for reason to engage those things. So one interpretation is they really exist, and we got to accept them because they're necessary for thought. So, roughly put, we need these to engage in thought, we engage in thought, so they got to exist. Other people take Kant to be saying that, no, these things aren't really real for real, but they're very useful fictions. That it's just a useful way to, pragmatically useful in terms of accomplishing stuff. To use a crappy analogy, think of like corporations being people. Now, one way to look at that is that corporations really are people. Like Mitt Romney said, corporations are people, my friend. Another way to look at it is say, corporations really aren't people, but it's a useful legal fiction that we create this notion of corporations as people for various, legal purposes, like, matters of like bankruptcy, debt, responsibility, etc. So those are the kind of the two interpretations. One is, we can't think without those concepts, so they're really real for real. Or it could be just, they're really useful, so we'll just pretend as if they're real. Now, one of the uses for at least, God and the self is ethics. Which takes us to the final thing for Kant, is ethics. Now, as we saw, Kant talks about theoretical reason, and this is reason that yields knowledge about the world of experience. It deals with the physical stuff. Kant claimed that we believe the physical world governed by laws. In his case, the laws put forth by Newton, and of course, there's also logical laws. But of course, we also encounter not just physical objects roaming around, but people. And he claims that kind of corresponding to, analogous to the laws governing the physical world, there are also moral laws. And he claims that we engage in what's called practical reason. Now again, the terms can be kind of misleading, because we often think of theoretical reason as being really, abstract stuff. And we think of practical reason as being able to do very pragmatic things. Like, this would be, reasoning about, very theoretical things like theoretical physics, quantum physics, etc. And practical reason we often think of as, that we'd be able to do stuff like, I used to use the example of like being able to program a VCR, but no one uses those today. It'd be like being able to set up, setting up streaming video on your TV using a Roku or something like that, making that stuff work. Or like fixing your car. Now, Kant again means different stuff. This would be what we consider to be like the physical sciencey stuff, and this is essentially his moral reasoning. And his work on this is the critique of pure reason, critique of practical reason. Now, he wrote two big books on ethics. First, in 1785, The Foundation of the Metaphysics of Morals, and in 1787, The Critique of Practical Reason. Now, Kant was all about duties, motives, the dignity and moral worth of people, and rather importantly, there being an absolute, unchanging moral law. Now, he doesn't make use of God in his ethics. There's some types of ethics, for example, like divine command theory, which base ethics on God. Divine command theory is a view that what is good because God says so, and what is bad because God says so. It's like a parent view of morality. Why shouldn't I do this? Because I say so. Why am I going to do that? Because I say so. Now, like Kant, or like Hume, he also believed you can't get morality by empirical observations. You can't go from what is to what ought to be. Now, some thinkers, like our good dead friend Thomas Aquinas, believed you could get from what is to what it ought to be. He believed you could discern moral qualities in the world. But Kant says no. So how is this ethics going to work? Well, it's essentially an extension of his view, in general. The idea is that morality is not out there in the world. It's not, something we observe. Morality is in our mind. It's in us. We crudely put, we put morality on events. So just like to use the crap analogy, when we experience what we call an object, given Kant's view, the object is composed, what we experience is composed, at least partially, by our categories and concepts. And likewise, the same thing works with the ethics. So crudely put, ethics is not good and evil, not out in the world. Good and evil is in your mind. But for Kant, it's not subjective because he thinks that everyone who's not defective has the same sort of system. So what's Kant's ethical stuff? Well, he wrote an entire book on it, or 2 books on it. But kind of the core of his view is what's called the categorical empirical. And there's a bit of Kantian ethics. Now for Kant, he believes that the good will is the only thing good without qualification. And he's arguing here again with other thinkers, people like For example, Aristotle, who believed that it's the virtues that make you good. And also, of course, we tend to think that, we often think of things like intelligence, prosperity, health, and happiness as being good. But Kant's view is those things are only sort of, conditionally good. They're only good if the goodwill is operating behind them. To be a little clearer about that, here's his idea. The various things we think of as being good, like intelligence, wit, etc., those things may become very bad without a goodwill. Likewise, we think of like good things like power, riches, fame. Those can, he claims, inspire pride and presumption without a goodwill. Now, some thinkers, we didn't look at John Stuart Mill, he wrote a lot of stuff, and Mill, crudely put, his view was the greatest happiness principle, that what makes things good is creating more happiness than unhappiness for everything that can feel pleasure and pain. And Kant doesn't buy into that. He thinks that only beings that have a good will are worthy of happiness. Now, sort of swinging back to the virtues, because why is he the concern about the idea of the virtues? Well, here's his idea. He notes that some of the ancients believed that the virtues were sort of good without qualification, that courage is just good, that intelligence would be good, that bravery would be good, etc. Now, Kant, interestingly and importantly enough, kind of steals an argument from our good dead friend Socrates, and also Plato and also Aristotle. And he argues this. Actually, I'll put it as a question. Suppose somebody had intelligence, good looks, they were calm, persuasive, charismatic. What would be a good hobby or occupation for such a person?
Politician.
Could be a politician. That also be, he can be a TV host. That also is a hobby, serial killer
Oh, true.
would be a good option for them, because
Just be very charismatic and good looking.
yeah, people who are mass murderers, anyone can be a mass murderer. You just need people and a gun, But being a serial killer requires a degree of intelligence, typically, to keep on serial killing. And many of them are very charming people. Good, often, not always, but often, good-looking, charming people. I mean, a good example, if you watch, like the Gotham series, sort of the pre-Batman, the guy, the ogre. There's one of the soon-to-be defeated villains. He's a perfect example. He's intelligent, he's well-educated, he's charming, he's cultivated, charismatic, but he tortures people to death. They don't meet his standard. He's got his own little torture, well-designed, elegant, torture room, but nonetheless pretty evil. So, Kant's argument is if someone can have all these great qualities, but if they have an evil will behind them as opposed to a good will, then they're all the more dangerous. I mean, also you can think of the great villains of real life or fiction. The ones that are great villains always have all these, aside from their evil, they have all these great, wonderful qualities.
Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah, Hannibal Lecter. Wonderful person, except for that cannibalism. Darth Vader. Great guy, except for that whole dark side of the Force evil thing. Lex Luthor. Great guy, except for the whole evil thing. And so he does seem to be right. And also, this is not new to Kant. Socrates argued for the unity of the virtues. He noted that exact problem. Someone can have all these positive qualities, but if they don't have all of the virtues, that makes them all the more dangerous. Now, one of the sort of key questions in morality, and if you take the class in ethics, which I teach every fall and spring, is the question of what is it? How do you judge the goodness of, say, a person? What is it that makes somebody good, or how do you decide the goodness of an action? Now, one view is A pragmatic view is often the effects. What is it? You'd say someone is a pragmatic thing. You would say someone is good if they do good stuff. Now, Kant's view is this. He claims the goodwill is not good because of what it achieves. It's not based on its ability to achieve its goals. He thinks that goodwill by itself is to be esteemed more than anything it might accomplish. And to be kind of extreme about this, he says, even if the goodwill accomplished nothing, and it just, epic fail with every attempt, that would still be what matters. It's not he's not going to say accomplishments are meaningless, but his view is essentially, what matters is not what a person, from the moral standpoint, what is achieved, but the will. What does the person will? Was their will good or bad? Now, by that, he doesn't mean something like this. He doesn't mean like the sort of crappy example I use is, imagine someone sitting on a couch and they're playing, some Xbox One, a little Destiny, and stuffing in some Cheetos, drinking a little Mountain Dew, and they say, "Oh gosh, I'd really like to go, and help, people who are in poverty or something, but this couch is so comfy, these Cheetos are so delicious, and I got all this Mountain Dew plus, Xbox One." Now, Kant would say that person doesn't have the goodwill, they're just making excuses. Now, if you had someone who supposedly they truly willed the good, but they just were not very successful at stuff. Their plan, they always willed the good, but their plans always fell through. Or they just got killed or something. Kant would say, well, it's the willing that matters. Now, the reason why he thinks that, we'll see in just a moment, is that he thinks morality is not a matter of, say, consequences. And there's a whole sort of school of morality built around consequentialism, known typically as utilitarianism, where it's the consequences that matter. Everyone's heard the greatest good for the greatest number type of deal. That's kind of that deal. It's what's accomplished. And Kant thinks that what matters is not what you accomplish, but essentially why. What is the basis for that decision? Now, moral theorists also, of course, have to give us, a way to tell good from evil. And here's how it works out for Kant. The moral worth of something for him is not based in its effect. Why? Well, this is how he kind of reasons. He thinks that positive effects, like being happy, or negative effects, like being sad, need not involve a rational being. And we'll see in a bit why the whole rationality thing is super important to him. And here's the usual stupid example I use. Imagine after class, you're heading back to your car, and you're parked by some construction. You see there's some rocks torn up around it. And you're like, man, I got rocks and dirt on my car. And you pull off one of the rocks, you're like, holy crap, it's a diamond as big as my hand. In that case, you'd probably be fairly happy. But, as Kant would point out, there's no will of a rational being involved. You're just happy because of that, situation. And he says, well, that, the role of the rational being is of critical importance. Which does raise the obvious question, why is that so important? Well, here's his answer. Here's how you tell the good. For him, the good consists only in the conception of law. Namely, basically it's the law that defines good and bad. And as soon as you make your choice, as soon as you will your choice, the good is already there, or the bad, and you don't need to wait around to see the result. So his view is essentially that there's a moral law. When you follow that moral law, to follow it, you have willed the good. You're good. And you don't have to wait around to see what fruit that tree shall bear. Similarly, if someone makes the evil choice, then they're evil, even if the results are turned to be somehow good, or what we call beneficial. The way I always think of a good illustration of this is in video games. If you ever played any of BioWare's video games, like Knights of the Old Republic, or the Knights of the Old Republic MMO game, or if you played Mass Effect 1, 2, or free. And what they always have is they always have the, the choice options. In Star Wars, of course, it's light side, dark side. And in, Mass Effect, you've got, was it like, there's Paragon and, I guess, Jerk. No, I always pick the Paragon one because the bad ones, except in the end, we get to kill the council. Totally killed those guys. Because they were riding me hard the whole game and taking what they deserve. That's good ethics right there. Actually, Ricardo kind of would have made the bad choice. Although I think it was a good choice. But anyways, the idea is like in those video games, when you pick your choice, you get your like dark side or light side points, your Paragon or bad points, without the result is you pick evil or you pick good. So the choice is the moral decision, which does have some appeal because you can easily imagine someone makes what we might consider the good choice, will and the good, but it may end up having like terrible results, like getting them killed. Like they try to save someone and they drown. It's like, well, right choice, but man, that sucks. Or someone may decide to do the evil thing, like shoot at somebody, and they may miss. The bullet ricochets and hits the bad guy, like, hey, you're the hero. It's like, yes, hero. So in a way, Kant does have a certain appeal. It's what you choose to do as opposed to what kind of falls out. And because it's a matter of willing, the only beings that can will, of course, are rational beings, that we can make that choice. Now, so it's all about the law. So what's his moral test? Because one thing that every moral theorist is going to do is it's always got to tell us like what we should do and what we shouldn't do. And Kant presents a pretty straightforward test. Here's how you do it. You have something you want to do, and your question is, would it be right or would it be wrong? And so the first step is you would create what he calls a maxim. Not the soft porn magazine for men, but a maxim is self-given, self-interested permission to act. In other words, I give myself permission to do something that I want to do, that I think is in my self-interest. It's like my personal will. Then what I have to do, according to Kant, is I have to see if I can will the corresponding universal law. In other words, crudely put, my maxim is I give myself permission to do this. The universal law is everyone has permission to do the same thing. So it goes from it's okay, I give myself an okay to do it to everyone now has permission to do this. It becomes the law. Now, if it matches up, then it's okay. If it doesn't, not okay. Now, good question would be, so why should I believe that? And Kant says, basically that's what people think, which obviously is not the case because a lot of people don't think that's correct. That's what he's saying. So let's take an example. The example he gives is this. Suppose one finds oneself in a common situation. You need money, but you don't got money. Now, if you go to the bank and say, I don't got money, but I need some money for some stuff, they just give you money.
Nope.
Typically,
I wish.
yeah, typically, usually they give you money if you don't really need the money. You get good credit and all that stuff. So you get the money, you get a promise to pay it back. But suppose, yeah, with some extra. But suppose, again, you know you can't pay it back. Now, in that case, the question would be, can I lie? Would that be okay? No, the maximum would be, I give myself permission to lie to get the money. And Kant says there's two questions here. One is a question of it being, is it prudent? In other words, this would be basically looking at the consequences. If I lie, what are the chances of me getting caught? If I get caught, what is the punishment? Et cetera, et cetera. And Kant says that's not a matter of ethics. That's just being prudent, pragmatic, practical. What kind of bad stuff, what kind of unfortunate stuff could happen to me? The second concern is it actually right? Which is a question of ethics. Now, his test, again, is straightforward. I mean, the question of is it prudent or not would be, pragmatic calculations. What is my chance of being caught? If I get caught, what is the punishment? Can I avoid that? And that'd be a matter of pure pragmatics. Ethically, he says you'd have to ask the following question. Can I will that my maximum can be universal law? Or roughly put, can I will that if I can lie to get money, that it could be a law of morality, that everyone could lie to get money? In other words, what he's asking us to do basically is legislate morality. That we would say, imagine a world where lying is now okay. Now, can we do that? Can a person rationally will that everyone can lie to get money? Well, perhaps. But what would be the effect in a world like that? Suppose it was the moral law. Everyone may lie. Would people trust people?
No.
No, because lying, the only reason lying works is because most people don't lie. It's considered wrong. If lying was the norm, the law, then we'd expect everyone to
Lie.
lie. And so it short-circuited itself. So Kant's claim is, I want to lie to get the money because it's advantageous, because most people don't lie. But if everyone could lie, if that was the law, then lying would not work anymore. Kind of like, with cheating. If everyone could cheat, cheating is no longer effective. Cheating only, I think of people using the pharmaceuticals in sports. If everyone's using them, they're not an advantage anymore. It's one argument people gave us why they should just say, use whatever you want. Because then you don't have to worry about policing it. Everyone would be equally doped up. But it would be fair competition, because if everyone's got equally good dope, they're all competing equally. So that's his test. Crudely put, the test is, can you, will the corresponding universal law? Crudely put, if you want to do it, are you willing to let everyone else have permission to do it too? If the answer is yeah, it's okay. Supposedly. Now he calls this, they have a fancy term to it, he calls it the categorical imperative. And he believes that, I mentioned before, that everything works in accord with laws. But rational beings have, in regards to the moral law, we have the capacity, at least in terms of the noumena, to choose to obey or not obey. And he claims, well, in terms of why he calls it the categorical imperative, the answer is this. Imperatives are commands, like in English 101. Hypothetical imperatives are conditionals. If you want to make money, buy low, sell high. Or if you want to lose weight, exercise more, eat less. Categorical imperatives are not hypothetical. It's not, if you want this, do this. It's simply categorical, namely, just do this. In his categorical imperative, his moral deal is this. Act only on that maxim whereby thou comest at the same time, will that it should become a universal law. Now, to illustrate this, he gives 3 examples. And since we're down to a few minutes, I'll just say suicide bad, lying bad, letting your talents rest bad, helping others generally good. Joseph. So last couple things for Kant here. Now, Kant believes that rational beings have moral status. Why? Well, because we have that capacity for willing. The other stuff are what he calls objects of the inclination. And one thing philosophers have to do is they have to divide up the world of things that matter morally and things that don't. And for Kant, it's a pretty sharp divide. Rational beings matter, the objects of our inclination, which is everything else, animals, tables, chairs, etc., do not. Now he thinks this leads to what he calls his supreme practical principle, which is we're obligated to treat rational beings, ourselves and others, as ends and not just means. Why? Well, it's basically a consistency argument. I regard myself as not a thing, but as a person. And so I wish to be treated as an end and not just as a means. To be consistent, if being a rational being gives me that moral status, I have to accept the same as true of everyone. So basically it's, golden rule. Treat others as you'd be treated yourself. So if I would not want to be treated just as a means, then I must, if my reason is I'm not a means because I'm a rational being, I have to apply that to everyone. Now, this doesn't mean that you can never use people as means, otherwise you're gonna be able to shop for groceries or get your car worked on. But he thinks you can't treat people just as means. Now, again, for Kant, it's all about the laws. And the good question is, where do the laws come from? And the answer is basically, well, us. We are what he calls the citizens and lawmakers of the kingdom of ends. How so? Well, his view basically is where the laws come from is his categorical imperative. We make up the moral rules. And he sees that as important because if the moral rules are imposed from the outside and you're forced to obey, you're not being good. You're just being compelled. If we're acting from, say, our emotions and desires, we're not good either. We're just acting, we're acting not for moral reasons. And he thinks that morality has to be a matter of that free choice. You have to choose to obey the law rather than being imposed on you or rather just being ruled by emotions. So it needs three things for morality: freedom, immortality, and God. Why? Well, freedom we got to have because if, we think, for example, choose a stupid example, if there's a storm and a tree crushes your car, you don't call the tree evil. I mean, you might not be a tree, but we don't hold the tree accountable because it didn't choose. Now, if someone cuts down a tree and drops it in your car intentionally, we would hold them accountable because we think they had a choice. Now, as we saw, Kant thinks you can't prove freedom. It's unprovable. But we need to have it, because without freedom, we can't have morality. We really, really want morality. Secondly, immortality. Now, one condition on moral theories is they got to be practical. In other words, an average person has got to be able to live up to at least the basics. They don't have to be like a moral saint, but they must at least be able to not evil. Kant thinks that morality requires that we conform perfectly to the moral law, which may seem ridiculously high. But he's aware of that condition, so he says, well, we have to be immoral. We have to be immoral. Freudian step. So we have to have the capacity for infinite existence, because it'll take forever to become morally perfect. And lastly, we got to have God. Now, he doesn't think we need God to basically motivate us, because if we're good or act good because we're afraid of being punished, hoping to get a reward, we're not really being good, we're being pragmatic. But he thinks that we need God to satisfy our conception of justice, that we see the wicked thrive and the good suffer, and we need God to set the books right. And lastly, for Kant, why was Kant super important? Well, he's Kant. The main reason is, well, basically this. As I mentioned, most of the 19th and 20th century philosophy, they regard that as an attempt to understand Kant. And people regard it as so important in terms of, as I mentioned, people who do Kant as their job, they divide philosophy into pre-Kant, and post-Kant. But essentially, he shaped philosophy in the following ways. The objectivity of knowledge, he didn't originate that, but helped shape that notion. The relationship between the knower and what is known, the nature and limits of science and reason, the nature of self, the nature of moral judgments, and religious knowledge. And in closing, as I mentioned before, heard a bit on NPR about I think it's like a neuroscientist talking about how Kant influenced, his view about perception and how we see the world. Okay, so that ends the stuff. Not all the stuff, but just this stuff. And so be sure to complete, if you haven't done so already, exam 3 and 4, quizzes part 4 by end of day, April 24th. Be sure, if you're going to do the final, be sure to complete it before Thursday at finals week at noon. And again, I've got the jury duty coming up, so we'll be having email contact during the day. But I'll be able to do my email this weekend. So if I don't see you again, good luck with the stuff. Have a successful life and enjoy the cosmos.